Learn how to create a JavaScript object that represents a transaction. In this lesson, we want to look at how we can create transaction objects. We currently have three separate values. If we move into our JavaScript file, you can see we have a value for description, another one for the amount, and lastly, we have another value for the type. So instead of keeping them separate the way we did in the previous lesson, we want to combine them into one object. So they will no longer be separate. They will just be in one object. And the way we are going to do that is something that is very simple. We are just basically going to have to refactor what we currently have in our transaction form. So this is where we're going to be making all of our changes. And what we are going to be changing is actually not something very much. We're just basically going to have to remove all the console information, and we are now going to group them together inside one object. And don't forget that in JavaScript, creating an object is as simple as a breeze. So once you have your object name, then you can pass in the element to that object. So in our case, let's make an object, and we're going to call that object transaction, since this corresponds to what we're trying to do. And this transaction, we're going to open curly braces since it is an object, and inside it, we're going to pass in what we already have. Our description is going to be description dot value. Then we're going to have another one for amount. And as for this amount, since this is going to be a number, we're going to digress a bit by having to wrap the value in a number method, amount dot value. And lastly, the type is going to be type dot value. So now we have successfully put all of our transaction inside one object, which is the transaction object. Now I can now go ahead and log this out to the console. Console.log transaction. Now look at this compared to what we had previously. In the previous example, you will have to manually log each of the item one after the other. But in this case, now that we have it in a single object, then you can just go ahead and then log the object directly without logging multiple elements into the console. So like before, let's just go ahead and let's try this. So I'll open the console and clear it. Then let me add transaction. And now you can see that previously it was returning one after the other, like a list. But this time around, it's returning an object because we have transformed our element of our express tracker into an object. And you can see that the object contains the description, the amount, and the type. And then you can see that those information inside of this single object. So we no longer need to be, skimming over our response line by line to see what is actually logged. Everything is already inside one object, and by clicking that object, you can see a full breakdown of whatever is contained. So let's assume that we have more values that needs to be captured from our expense tracker. Once we add it to this transaction object, then it will capture it with ease, and we'll be able to see the output inside our console. So now we have three values that we capture from our form, and it just makes sense to treat them as one transaction since they all belong to the same application. So we created a transaction object, And inside that object, we created three properties: the description, the amount, as well as the type. And then this description comes from this description dot value, amount comes from the amount dot value, and the type comes from the type dot value. But like I said earlier, that you will notice that here we have this number method around the amount. And the reason why is because values returned from HTML input are returned as string. So number method is what helps us to convert this amount into a number. And now one transaction is represented by one JavaScript object, which is this transaction object that we created earlier. Now, here are a few key takeaways from this lesson. Number one, objects can group related information together. So when you have information that are related, you can always use object to group them together. Aside from the fact that it provides better readability, it also makes it much more easier, knowing fully well that all your elements or properties of your object are contained inside one place. Number two, a transaction has a description, amount, and time. Our transaction has a description, it has an amount, and it has a time, which actually makes it a full process of registering whether an expense or an income occurs. Number three, the value property returns form values as string. So by default, when you use the value property in JavaScript, it returns form values as string. And that is the reason why we need to put this amount dot value in a number method, because by default, form input are returned as string. So JavaScript will help us pass this and convert it into a number. Number four, the number method converts the amount into a number. So whatever is typed inside the amount is converted into a number. And lastly, one transaction can now be represented by one object. So if you have multiple transactions, can be represented by using different objects. But now we have just one, and that one transaction can be represented by one object.